Hey everybody. I noticed that the blog was kind of quiet today. And I kind of didn't submit anything yesterday, so I feel like I'm kind of behind. I'm kind of sick, but I really wanted to do this. So hopefully this won't end up a massive failure. But without further ado, I present to you Beauty and the Nobody, Chapter 3. Vanitas and Zack went to Gaia's house silently to surprise her. Since he announced that he would marry her, the whole town followed him to her house. Zack began laughing and smiling at Vanitas' proposal for the girl. He, like many others, hoped it would turn out well. Gaia's gonna get the surprise of her life, right, Vanitas? Guessed Zack, smiling at Ventus, who smiled broadly.
Yup, bragged Vanitas. This is gonna be her lucky day. Once he released the branch, he bent forward to peer at Gaia's house. It smacked Zack right in the mouth, leaving leaves in his mouth. Vanitas cleared his throat to get everyone's attention. I must thank you all for coming to my wedding. First, I need to go in there and propose to the girl. He began laughing at his blunder, and everyone else laughed too, except for his fangirls. They were crying. You, said Vanitas, poking Zack on the nose. When Gaia and I walk out that door.
Oh, I know, said Zack excitedly. I'll strike up the band! With wild waves of his baton, the band began playing the wedding march.
Not yet,
hissed Vanitas, clocking Zack in the head. Sure, mumbled Zack, silencing the band. Gaia was sitting in a chair near the door reading her book when she heard a knock on the door. Who could it be, she wondered. Placing her book on her seat with it open to her place, she slowly walked over to the door and looked through the sea-hole her father installed. To her displeasure, she saw Vanitas looking at her through the sea-hole. That dick. With all the politeness she could muster, Gaia opened the door and let the swaggering Vanitas in. Vanitas, she said mildly. What a pleasant surprise.
He swaggered up to her, causing her to step back a bit. Isn't it, Gaia? He rhetorically asked. I'm just full of surprises. You know, Gaia, there's not a girl in town who would love to be in your shoes. This is the day. He paused, looking at his reflection before continuing. This is the day your dreams come true.
What would you know about my dreams, Vanitas? Asked Gaia, feeling her patience slipping. She quickly walked over to the table to create some distance between her and Vanitas.
Plenty, he said. Picture this.
He sat down in her chair, placing his muddy shoes on her book.
My cutting lodge. My latest kill roasting on the fire. And my little wife massaging my feet.
Gaia inconspicuously covered her nose so she wouldn't smell the scent of dirty socks and fickle matter. But Vanitas took no notice.
With little ones playing on the floor with the dog, he continued, and you'll have 6 or 7.
He stood up to be a few inches away from her. Dogs? Asked Gaia innocently.
No, Gaia, chuckled Vanitas. Strapping boys like me.
Gaia picked her book up, knowing her quiet time was ruined. She went to put it back on the shelf. Imagine that, she said a little sarcastically.
Do you know who that little wife will be? Asked Vanitas, following her to the bookshelf.
Let me think, said Gaia sarcastically, placing the book on the highest shelf.
You, Gaia, he replied, acting as though
she didn't say anything. He placed both hands on either side of the wall she stood in front of until she ducked under his armpit. Gross, I might add. Vanitas, she said lightly, I'm speechless. I really don't know what to say. She pressed herself up against the door as Vanitas walked over with a smirk on his face.
Say you'll marry me, Gaia,
he said, trapping her again. I'm sorry, Vanitas, said Gaia, reaching for the doorknob effortlessly. I just don't deserve you. Skillfully, she stepped outside from his attempt to kiss and opened the door, causing him to fall outside. Vanitas landed in the mud just as the band began playing. Gaia tossed his boots out before shutting the door and locked herself in. Vanitas sat up peevishly when Zack approached. "So how'd it go?" he asked. He got no answer because Vanitas grabbed him by the throat and pulled him down the path. Follow it. Blah. Sorry. He got no answer because Vanitas grabbed him by the throat and pulled him down the path, pouting. "I will have Gaia as my wife," he hissed as he pulled Zack away. A few minutes later, Gaia hesitantly stepped out, looking around. "Is he gone?" she asked to apparently no one. Once she saw that she was gone, she began walking to the barn to feed the animals. "He asked me to marry him," she seethed. "Me, the wife of that boorish, arrogant." "Madame Vanitas, can you just see it? Madame Vanitas, his little wife. No, sir, not me. I guarantee it. There must be more than this provincial life." Gaia ran out of the barn and went into the field near her house. She looked at the sunset and began singing some more. "I want adventure in the wide somewhere. I want it more than I can tell. And for once it might be grand to have someone understand. I want much more than they have planned." She was cut off when she saw her father's horse, Philip, running out of the forest and stood at her feet. Her eyes widened as she saw that the horse was alone and wild-eyed. She ran to Philip and touched his neck. "Where's Daddy?" she asked frantically. "Where is he, Philip? You must take me to him." She untied the cart from Philip and saddled herself on. With a crack of the reins, Philip took off into the darkening forest. An hour or so later, Gaia found herself in front of a dark, scary gate. The castle looked darker and scarier still and caused shivers to run down Gaia's spine. "What is this place?" she asked aloud. Philip neighed and trembled fearfully until Gaia calmed him down by saying gentle words. She hopped off of him and ran through the weak gate. On the ground, she saw her father's hat on the ground. "Daddy," she whispered, picking it up and looking at the castle. "You couldn't keep quiet, could you?" said Ceyx moodily, still ranting about Axel's mistake. "You had to invite them to stay, serve them tea, sitting in the master's chair, pet the pooch." "I was trying to be hospitable," argued Axel, crossing his arms. They heard the sound of the door opening and stopped arguing at once. A woman's voice called out and they ran to look immediately. What they saw was extraordinary. A beautiful young woman close to the master's age going up the stairs, calling for her father. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Ventus hopped up to Aqua saying, "Mom, there's a girl in the castle." "Now then," scolded Aqua, I'll not have telling stories." "Really, Mom, I saw her." Ventus tried to put up an argument, but Aqua ignored that. "Into the tub," she said, scooting the green little cup into Studsy's tub. "Hey!" squealed Larkson, the feather duster. "I saw a girl in the castle." "See?" said Ven, spitting water out of his mouth. "I told you." Elsewhere, Ceyx and Axel continued arguing. "Irresponsible," scolded Ceyx. "Wax-eared, slack-jawed." He got cut off when he heard a girl's voice near the door. "Daddy?" she called, looking about. Up close, she was even more beautiful. She wore a blue pretty dress and had a lovely brown hair. Her little form moved through the halls silently as she looked around. "Did you see that?" asked Axel, rushing to get a closer look at the retreating girl. He and Axis went close to where she was and stared at her. "It's a girl!" "I know it's a girl," sneered Ceyx. "Don't you see? She's the one! She's come to break the spell!" "Wait a minute!" called Ceyx, running to catch up with Axel. They ran to the door of the dungeon and opened it loudly to get her attention. She turned to look back and called out for her father. Hesitantly, she walked into the room and called for her father again. As she walked up the stairs that led to the dungeons, Ceyx and Axel stared after her. "Is anyone here?" she called out into the cold room. "Gaia!" she heard her father's voice come out from one of the formidable doors close by. "Daddy!" she cried, running over to the door and got down on her knees. He looked sick and tired as he feebly hung onto the bars of the door. She took one of his hands in hers and looked at him closely. "How did you find me?" asked her father shakily before he coughed into his free hand. "Oh, your hands are as cold as ice," she whispered. "I've got to get you out of here."
"Gaia," said Ansem quickly, "I want you to leave this place."
"Who's done this to you?" she asked angrily, ignoring his pleas for her to leave.
"There's no time to explain," he said. "You have to go now."
"I won't leave you," she protested, shaking her head.
"What are you doing here?"
A loud, growling voice boomed, and Gaia was swept up to her feet before sinking to her knees. "Who's there?" she asked shakily, trying to recover from her shock. "Who are you?"
"I'm the master of this castle,"
said the voice. The voice was still growling and menacing, but quieter than before. The shadow the voice belonged to swept around near the dungeon. "I've come for my father," said Gaia weakly. "Please let him out. Can't you see he's sick?"
"Then he shouldn't have trespassed here."
The voice was louder and angrier than before, if it were possible. "But he could die," cried Gaia helplessly. "Please, I'll do anything."
"There's nothing you can do," the shadow hissed. "He's my prisoner."
"There must be something I can—" "Wait! Take me instead!" Her voice stopped the shadow in his tracks.
"You," he growled before softening his voice a little. "You would take his place." "Gaia, no," said Ansem. "You don't know what you're doing."
"If I did," she said, "would you let him out?" She knew that this was a gamble of fate, but she had to save her father. He meant the world to her since her mother died.
"Yes," replied the shadow, "but you must promise to stay here forever."
Suddenly, Gaia felt a little bewildered. "Come into the light," she ordered gently, if not shakily. The shadow stepped into the light to reveal a scary-looking man in a black coat. His skin was probably tan since it was darker than his ash-colored hair. His eyes were amber-colored, but they looked as though they were on fire. Burning eyes, not pleasant. Needs some clear eye. The rough, gloved hands that grabbed her were drawn into tight fists. He stared at her intently, and she felt herself beginning to shake. He was as tall as a building and glared at her murderously. Gaia gasped fearfully and grabbed onto her father's hands tightly, closing her eyes.
"No, Gaia!"
cried Ansem, placing his hands on her shoulders.
"I won't let you do this."
Gaia resolutely stood up and walked over to the beastly man, defeated. "You have my word," she whimpered, keeping her eyes closed so tears wouldn't fall.
"Done,"
growled the beast, rushing over to Ansem's jail door.
"Gaia,"
said Ansem once he was pulled out.
"I'm old. I've lived my life."
Before he could touch her one last time, he was dragged away by the beast and disappeared out of the door. "Wait!" begged Gaia, but the beast didn't stop. "Wait!" She stood up and ran over to the window that overlooked the front yard. She could hear her dad calling for her and begged her to be released, but a spider-like cage he was in took him away. In defeat, Gaia placed her face into her hands and began weeping. As Xemnas went back up the stairs to collect the girl, he was apprehended by Axel. "Master," he said nervously.
"What?"
snarled Xemnas, glaring at Axel. "Well, since the girl is staying here now, maybe you should give her a proper room?" A growl from Xemnas made him want to swallow the words he just said. Then again, maybe not. Xemnas ignored Axel and walked into the dungeons. He saw the girl weeping violently and felt besieged by guilt. She was on her knees with her face in her hands and was shaking like a leaf. "You didn't even let me say goodbye," she cried tearfully. "I'll never see him again. I didn't even get to say goodbye." Xemnas rubbed the back of his neck with his hand, truly at a loss for what to do.
"I'll take you to your room,"
he said as patiently as he could muster. "My room?" she squeaked. "But I thought—"
Xemnas felt his patience wearing thin. "Do you want to stay up in the tower?"
"No," she said quickly.
"Then follow me."
he said, grabbing Axel to light the way in the dark halls. He led the quiet girl silently down the hall that held an empty room, holding Axel as he walked. He glanced back at her to see her head bowed, with her eyes closed. She looked beautiful and delicate but defeated. Guilt besieged him again, but he brushed it away. "Say something to her," whispered Axel. "What?" said Xemnas quietly, but Axel made a gesture that told him to do as he was told. With a sigh, Xemnas glanced back at the girl. "I hope you like it here," he said, choosing his words carefully. "You can call me Xemnas." Axel made another gesture that said, "Go on," and Xemnas glanced back at her again. "You're free to go wherever you want," said Xemnas, "except for the West Wing." "What's in the—" she quietly whispered out. "It's forbidden!" Xemnas growled in a louder tone. He saw her flinch like he poked her with something, but continued on his way to lead her to her room. They stopped at a white door and he opened it. There was a bed that was decent size for a girl her height and a wardrobe. She slowly walked into the doorway and stood shakily. "Now if you need anything," said Xemnas, "my servants will attend to you." He watched as she slowly stepped into the room and stared about woefully. "Dinner," whispered Axel into his ear. "Invite her to dinner." "You'll join me for dinner," said Xemnas, feeling his patience dissipate. "That's not a request." With that, he slammed the door, leaving the young woman in her woes. He stormed out with Axel to get into the study room to wait for her.